And welcome back to Mind Matters and Mischief, the podcast where we dive into the matters of the mind. Everything from mental health, self-care, mental illness, growth mindset, mental wellness, and self-improvement. But we always keep a life vest made of humor handy. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Jim Shoopack. We're here to make sense of the madness and find the fun in the functional. So make sure wherever you are, unless you're driving a vehicle, make sure you hug your cat, your dog, your guinea pig, your salamander, your lizard, your horse, your chicken, whatever it happens to be for me. Sit down, relax, and as always, welcome to the show. Pardon me. So today, folks, we're on our podcast episodes known as The Doctor and the Dictionary. So, not me, has nothing to do with me, but the Doctor and the Dictionary. It's called Submarine Warfare and the Growth Mindset. So, again, welcome back to the show. I am your host, and as many of you know, I do hold a doctorate in education. I spent many years in school, about 12, I believe. I don't even remember. And then when I mean school, I mean college, undergrad, master's, and doctorate, whatever, a long time. About as much time as I did from K through 12, or more or less about that time. As I tell my family, my friends, I'm a glutton for educational punishment, but really what it boils down to is I had a calling, because you don't put yourself through that unless you have that specific calling to advance your degree. So either way, I digress. Let's take a step back here, but really a lot of the years that I was in school, and even today, I love learning, continue to love learning, but a lot of what I did focused on how our human mind, the mind is such a beautiful place. Oh my gosh, such a beautiful place. And I mean, this comes from someone who wanted to kill himself, who had major depressive disorder, who didn't know how I felt, had a name for a long time. And, just coming out on the other end, it's like the mind is just, you have to treat it well. And that comes with, if you have to take medicine, you take medicine. You definitely talk to your primary care physician. Definitely go to therapy if you need it. And you know what? Even just to test it out, it's probably a good thing just to test out. I think it's just so important. I think all of us, every person walking the earth, can use a therapist. Every person walking the earth, not necessarily every day, every week, but it might be every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every 4, whatever. But either way, I mean, I think therapy is such a huge, important part of our everyday process and everyday just learning coping skills, learning how to deal with some of the things, some of the chaos, some of the trauma, some of the I don't know, curveballs, knuckleballs, whatever, some of the crap life throws at us. I mean, pardon my French, but really sometimes that's what it is. But learning how to navigate those things properly is just so important, so that's just what I talk about as far as our how our human mind adapts and how we can learn to ask for help and don't be prideful in asking for help. And one thing, and I have this challenge I deal with. And again, I mean, I have the podcast show, what have you, but I'm human, and there are times where I have a growth mindset, and there's times that I have a fixed mindset. How our mind overcomes the fear of failure. And that's one thing that I struggle with sometimes a little bit now, because I've been working on a memoir, and I really feel that I am called to put this memoir out. It's, and people might be like, what are you going to bring to the table? But what it is for me is how it felt authentically to go through major depressive disorder. The trauma that losing my brother to suicide brought to me, to my family, the effects of it. But at the same time, how I leaned into my faith, how I did get the proper medicine, how I did get the therapy, and how my dogs, two of them that are laying right next to me as we speak, how they help me to just want to continue to live. They just wanted me to continue to live. Their unconditional love. Like there's nothing like it. Like I just feel it. They just want me to be here, and it's a beautiful thing. Well, I could talk about dogs all day and cats all day, and we'll get to that in another episode. Actually, I have an episode next week. Actually, it's gonna be more of I don't know, melancholy episode, if you will, but dealing on the grief of navigating the death of a furry angel. I think unfortunately many of us have had that in the past. And it actually was a suggestion of mine from a friend of mine, and I have been working on that one, and I want to make sure that I was able to give it the respect that it deserved, bring it to life, because I have lost, some furry angels. I've a dog in the past, a couple cats, and it sucks, for lack of a better word. I don't know how else to put it, but it sucks. And I think it's just important for us to how we deal with that, how we cope with that. So that will be one episode coming up, but at the same time, we're gonna take the other end of that, if you will, and a following week, another week, we will do probably the following week, I would say, is one on how having a dog or a cat or for angel, what have you, helps you to navigate your depression, anxiety, and that's something I can speak forever on, because these dogs and cats, well, the cats I used to have really helped to keep me alive, gave me purpose. And even Sonny, who's no longer with us, he passed away many years ago, but he gave me a purpose, and it was beautiful. And it is beautiful. And it's like, I just keep thinking, I'm like, I want to rescue all the dogs and all the cats, but all I'll find out is they're going to be the ones rescuing me, because I always wind up being rescued by them. They do a good job of it. Okay. That's just giving you a preview about today, folks. Talking about fear of failure. Today's episode is personal for me, but not as much about dogs and cats. We're going to talk about a young man, and this guy, you may not have heard of him, but you've heard of his business. And when he was growing up, he wanted to be a medical doctor. He didn't have the money for tuition. Guy's name was Fred DeLuca. I don't expect you to know who Fred DeLuca is. In the mid-60s, he was a 17-year-old kid from Bridgeport, Connecticut. No money to his name, but he had a huge dream. Again, he wanted to be a medical doctor. And many people in his position probably would have looked at the cost of school and said, I can't afford it. There's no way I can do this. I have to just get a regular job, get a different job. I can't have that much debt. And that is a fixed mindset. Like, he saw it as a barrier and assumed that it was a permanent wall. Like, there's no way I can climb this wall. There's no way I can get around it. There's no way that I can achieve my dream of becoming a medical doctor. However, Fred DeLuca had something that many of us do not. And it was a neighbor who was a nuclear physicist. I kid you not. A neighbor who was a nuclear physicist. A guy's name who's Dr. Peter Buck. He was actually, like, how you have their family members. Well, okay, I digress on. You know how you have those people in your life, especially as you're growing up, they're not biological aunt or uncle, but you might call them our aunt and uncle, or you might see them as an aunt and uncle. Okay, does that sort of make sense? Well, that's what Dr. Peter Buck was to Fred DeLuca. Okay. And so he looked up to him, and he's like, man, this guy has this PhD in he's a nuclear physicist. He's like, man, obviously he was able to navigate this. Let me ask him, like, what suggestions do you have for me? And, Dr. Buck, he didn't tell him to give up. He asked for his advice. Dr. Buck didn't even tell him to find a scholarship. He basically looked at Fred DeLuca, 17-year-old, 11th, 12th grader, and he said one thing. And I don't quote this, but it's more or less what he said. Let's open up a submarine sandwich shop. Because who says that? Well, guess what? That's what Dr. Buck said to Peter DeLuca. He basically said, you can earn the money by doing these sandwich shop, and then that will help you to get you to school, so that's essentially what he was looking at. Okay. So we're going to look at the mischief, guys. Okay. Behind the birth of Subway, all of us have heard of Subway, and an early rival, Blimpie, which still exists but not nearly as popular as Subway. And really, it's a story about how one team used a definite growth mindset and they built an empire of like 37,000 stores, something like that. I think, yeah, I have 37,000 written here. I don't know if it's exactly 37,000, but I'm just going to say it's a lot. And while the other, even though Blimpie started first, they ended up on a very different path than Subway. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Subway story. The Pete's Submarine Gamble. Okay, it's called Pete, as in P-E-T, Peter, submarine. Okay, so Dr. Buck, he lends Fred DeLuca $1,000. At that time, I'm sure it's worth considerably more, but still, think about it for a second. This is very mischievous because, so you have a nuclear physicist and a teenager, and they walk into a submarine shop. It sounds almost like a bad joke or some sort of like joke where like, where are you going with this? Or what was your coffee this morning? I'm sorry, but either way. So, but still, it's true. So you have a nuclear physicist and a teenager, and they decide to sell sandwiches together. And they open up a shop called Pete's Super Submarines. You'll notice I said that very slowly because of the fact that it doesn't really roll off the tongue very well. Pete's Super Submarines. Now, talking about growth mindset in lesson one. So starting before you're even ready, you're building this plane as it's basically hitting the ground, and you know what I'm saying. So on the first date, they sold a good amount of sandwiches, 312. It was a hit, but there is mischief in the story. Fred didn't actually know how to run a business. He chose what it would be considered a crummy location, like a poor location, for the first shop, and soon they were losing money. So, person with a fixed mindset, and I get it, we've all been there, would have said, you know what, this first store is failing. I should quit before I lose more of Dr. Buck's money. But I guess we'd call him like Uncle Dr. Buck because that's what he was kind of like. But Fred and Dr. Buck did something counterintuitive. They decided to open a second store. It almost sounds like this is the bizarro world. Because it's almost like, I mean, for me personally, I'm so trained to think of like, okay, well, the store's not doing well, so let's cut our losses. So what do? They make more losses. So we already know how the story ends. So obviously they made the right decision, but they opened a second store. Now, why? Because they believed in the illusion of success. A professor of mine back in the day used to say, perception equals reality. And I often thought of that, and I was like, what do you mean perception? How someone perceives you or your business as being is the reality. Like, that's how they perceive. So if they perceive you as being successful, in their eyes, the reality is you are successful. So that's just something to consider. So by opening up that second store, that's what they did. They have the illusion of success. They give that perception that, yeah, we're doing really well for ourselves. So they figured, yeah, we have two shops. People are going to think business is really doing well. You know, they viewed the early failure not as a sign to stop, but lesson that they needed better visibility. I like to call a failure sometimes as data. You are learning your data. It's your data collecting. Okay, you're finding out ways that don't work so that you use ways, and you know what not to try again, so you know what to try because you've already tried the stuff that doesn't work. Basically, that's what it is. Okay. Now, it gets better. So, they need better visibility, right? So what do? They opened up another shop, a third shop, in a highly visible location. Now, that third shop, I guess third time's the charm. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I don't know. I guess it would be 1 out of 3 in this case. But regardless, in this shop, this finally started to make money. They were starting to really pull in some dough. So eventually, they realized though that the name, as I said before, Pete's Super Submarines, was a mouthful. And the people on the radio thought they were saying pizza marines. Pete's submarines, pizza marines, because they would sometimes call it that. And in commercials, they'd be like, oh, I want to come get some pizza. I'm going, is this Pizza Marines? And it's like, well, yeah, we don't sell pizza here, but isn't it Pizza? That's what people would think. They would think that. So in 1968, not long after they opened, they rebranded it as Subway. Looks like the Subway. So, okay. So Fred DeLuca, that's the young 17-year-old, okay, who wants to be a doctor. He eventually realized he was better suited for business than the medical field. So he trades in a stethoscope for a bread oven. But he kept the name of the parent company, Doctors Associates Incorporated. So it's basically like kind of giving props to his original dream and to his benefactor, like the guy who helped him out, Dr. Buck, his neighbor and slash uncle, his PhD. So he didn't abandon his quote unquote doctor identity. He just grew it into something that no one, even him probably, did not expect. Pardon me. Now we're going to go into the Blimpie story just a little bit. So the dictionary and the safe path. So we're going to take a year back, 1964. So from 65 when Subway opened to 64. 70 miles away in a place called Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the Hudson River from New York City, Midtown Manhattan. There's 3 high school friends, Tony Conza, Peter DiCarlo, and Angelo Baldessari, and they had a similar idea as the guys at Subway. They saw a sub shop in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. People were lined out the door. They were like, man, this could make a mint. But they had no money, and they had no name. So they did what any of us would do. They sat down with a dictionary. Basically opened up the dictionary, started at the letter A, worked their way through. They hit the B's, and they saw the word blimp. They thought, well, blimp is kind of shaped like a sandwich, at least the sandwiches they were making. So they added an IE to it, and Blimpie was born. Basically, that's the creativity of it. But that's what you do when you have no name. So Blimpie actually started, like I said, before Subway. Okay, so they did have a head start. On the first day, they worked long hours, 10 a.m. to midnight, and this is a lot of these people who are starting restaurants and even well into their restaurant careers wind up doing is long hours. That's why I couldn't do it. I love eating at restaurants, but I couldn't be the restaurateur myself. But they were there for about 14 hours, 10 a.m. to about midnight, wrapping sandwiches in the bags that the bread came in because they couldn't afford real wrapping paper like this at Blimpie or what have you on it. Okay, so now we're going to go into growth mindset lesson number 2. Scalability against comfort. So here's my question to you. And if you can't answer it, it's okay. You still passed the test. You're still here on the radio. You're still listening, so you get an A for today. So why is there a Subway, on every corner, or at least it seems that in 2026, while Blimpie has closed nearly 2,000 locations and has fewer than 100 left? Remember, Subway has 37,000. Blimpie has 100. They both started within about a year of each other. And it comes down to how they viewed growth. So Fred DeLuca, the individual, the teenager who wanted to be a doctor, he was obsessed with expansion. He was willing to fail, to learn from that failure, to pivot, and he wanted to franchise aggressively. He viewed every empty storefront as an opportunity to grow. Now, the Blimpie founders, they struggled internally. One partner left early on. They went through multiple ownership changes. And while Subway, was building a system that really anyone could follow, very simple system, they could franchise it, Blimpie remained more traditional business. They didn't adapt to the fast food explosion as quickly as Fred DeLuca and, Subway did. So by the time Blimpie did try to catch up, Subway had already used its growth mindset to eat the market, no pun intended. I won't quit my day job, I promise you. So in the world of business and in the world of the mind, if you aren't growing, you're shrinking. Something to consider. Just listen, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. It's a pretty cool thing to just consider there. So the more you grow, the less opportunity you have to shrink, but you're not staying stagnant. So now we're going to take a little deep dive by me, Jim, or Dr. Jim, whatever you choose to call me. Just don't swear at me. The psychology of the crummy location. So, as an educational doctor, I just want to focus briefly on Fred DeLuca's biggest mistake, and that's that first crummy location. Okay. In psychology, we talk about reframing. I'm not a psychology doctor, but trust me, through my depression, anxiety, I've done a lot of reading on psychology. I can't, I'm not going to be a psychological doctor or anything like that, but I've gone through a lot. So, and a fixed mindset looks at a bad location and says, I'm a failure. While a growth mindset looks at a bad location and says, this location is a failure, but I am a learner. So I'm going to take something out of this experience. I'm going to learn from this experience. So Fred didn't let the crummy location define who he was. It didn't let him define his identity. He used it, as I said before, as data. He realized that for a sandwich shop to work, you need to keep, pardon your pun here, your eyes on the fries, or in this case, eyes on the bread. So the mischief moment, Fred DeLuca, remember, 17-year-old Fred DeLuca wants to be a doctor, so driven that he once admitted his temperament wasn't suited for medical school because he couldn't sit still long enough to study. He had entrepreneurial mischief in his blood. He was the guy who would open a Subway in a gas station, a church, or even on a crane at a construction site. He wasn't afraid to look silly. He wasn't afraid to be the sandwich guy. Instead of the medical doctor, he wasn't afraid to be a sandwich guy instead of the medical doctor, because he knew that the title didn't matter. The growth mattered. So he was like the growth guy too, not just the sandwich guy, the growth guy. So as we close out today's episode, I want you to think about your own 1965. I know some of us weren't alive then, but it's based on Fred DeLuca, Subway, Blimpie. So are you standing at the front door of your first shop, worried about the crummy location, or are you sitting with a dictionary, waiting for the perfect name before you take a single step? The difference between a global empire and a vanished story is often just the willingness to open that second store when the first one is still struggling. It's the willingness to be the quote-unquote doctor's associates, even if you never go to med school. Don't wait for the perfect bread. Don't wait for the perfect wrapping paper. Just start. And that's one thing I have to tell you guys about this podcast. I had always said, I'll get to it someday. Right now, I don't know if I can. It's too much of the editing and this and that. And then what did I do? I learned about it. I just learned that it's not as difficult, not as challenging as I had perceived or had it in my mind. And guess what happened? I just did it. I didn't, like the name itself, Mind Matters and Mischief. I just want people to realize that's what it's about. Mind Matters and Mischief. Like your matters of the mind, things that are going on in mind. The mind, again, is a beautiful place. And it's so important that we are kind to our mind, but at the same time that we challenge ourselves. It's important because otherwise, that's the beautiful thing about life. You're only here a certain amount of time, and what you do in that time can define your legacy and how you make the world a better place. Really, that's what I see. I forget who said it, but there's 2 days. The two most important days in your life is the day you're born and the day you find out why. And I mean, I think that's something that I had wrestled with for a while, but now I know, and I'm just so pumped to be alive that it's just, and this is again somebody who wanted to die, someone who was suicidal, someone who I couldn't get up off a recliner. I could barely, I couldn't, I was afraid of being left alone in my house. The fear of my mind taking over me, basically killing myself. And for me, it's just like, it's, I know why I'm here. I know why and this podcast is part of that, guys. Like, I want you folks to know that I really hope that you're getting something out of these shows. I mean, next week is it's going to be a tougher one because we're going to be talking about, how to deal with the trauma of losing a furry angel dog, a cat. It could be any of your animals. Like it sucks. Like that's the worst. It's the worst day of your life, really. I mean, as far as having that pet is that itself. So I think it's important that we just realize that. But it's also okay to be kind to yourself through going through those trauma and people who, oh, it's just a cat, it's just a dog. They don't. They will never understand because there's such unconditional love that these dogs, these cats, at least in my case, have brought to me that I could never repay them. Never repay them. Like people who tell me I spoil my dogs, my cats. I said they are fairly compensated for the services that they provide, and I will take that to my grave. Well, on that note, guys, I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate the time. So that wraps up another session of My Matters in Mischief with me, Dr. Jim Shoopack. I hope you found something that did stimulate your mind and maybe inspired a little mischief. And I do, again, love putting the show together for you. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the show is to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Remember, we are now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Amazon Music. Woohoo, that's awesome. Leave a quick rating if you can, review. It generously helps other listeners to find the show. You can connect with me, Dr. Jim Shoopack, DrJimShoopack at gmail.com. Again, I'll read that again. D as in David, R as in Richard, J as in Jim, I as in Indiana, M as in Miami, S as in school, H as in helicopter, O as in octopus, another O as in octopus, P as in Peter, A as in alphabet, C as in Columbia, and K as in kangaroo at gmail.com. Email me about your questions, any other suggestions you have for the show. I would appreciate it. You can also reach out to me at www.jimshooppack.com. So remember, folks, also that 988 number, it is always out there for you, folks. If you ever go through crisis, you're going through turmoil, you're going through anything, they've heard it before. They're trained for you. They care about you. I care about you guys. I love you. I wouldn't be sharing some of my most intimate challenges if I did not feel that you were worth it. And I do feel you're worth it. So on that note, have a wonderful day, wonderful week, and I look forward to catching up with you next Tuesday. All right. God bless.